Clark Luthor and Jonathan Kent met up with an old drinking buddy of Jonathan's at the diner named Jack. Jonathan told Clark he figured they would need help destroying the kryptonite. Although Clark doubted a sorry drunk could help them in their quest, he kept his thoughts to himself. Jonathan asked Clark what was the best way to destroy kryptonite. Clark answered, throwing it into the sun. Jonathan and Jack looked at each other baffled. Jonathan went on, since that isn't really a possibility for us considering the amount of kryptonite we found and how weak it made Clark, they needed to find an alternative. Clark said they should concentrate on getting the kryptonite out of Malone's warehouse, then they could figure out how to send it into the sun. Jack perked up. He said he could help with that. Clark, incredulous, asked how. Jack said he worked security at the warehouse before Malone bought it up. He knew how they could get in and out without ever being seen, and he knew an easy way to get the mountain of kryptonite out of the warehouse unseen. Clark and Jonathan exchanged a look. Clark, Jonathan, and Jack arrived at a place near Malone's property that night. Jack led them to a door that opened up to a dark staircase that led down into a dark tunnel. They walked along the tunnel, Jonathan and Jack carrying their own flashlights. They were all dressed in black. Clark needled Jonathan and asked him if his wife was suspicious of his attire. Jonathan answered good-humoredly that Martha was at a bridge game until late, so she didn't see him leave. Clark joked that they needed to get going so they could get him back before curfew. They all laughed. Jonathan said after our last visit, we have to be ready for the guards to all be carrying kryptonite. Jack said then they'll just have to get creative. They got to the end of the tunnel and there was a ladder that led up to a circle hatch in the ceiling. Jack was first up the ladder, followed by Jonathan, and finally Clark. Jack opened the hatch and immediately Clark became weak and lost his grip on the ladder and fell. Jonathan asked Jack if they were inside the building with the kryptonite. Jack said yep and shouted down an apology to Clark, then popped up through the hatch. A few seconds later, Jack threw down a hazmat suit to Clark. Clark asked how was that supposed to help him. Jack just said, put it on, we gotta get a move on. Clark put on the suit and suddenly regained his strength. Clark climbed the ladder and entered the room filled with kryptonite. Jack was already pushing a huge covered cart towards them. He said we could put the kryptonite in this and get it out in the freight elevator and back. The cart was made of lead like the hazmat suit Clark had on. As Jonathan and Jack put on some gloves, Clark went about moving the kryptonite piece by piece into the cart. By the time he was finished, the cart was full and the mountain of kryptonite had been depleted. Jack said, cool, you get that cart into the freight elevator and Jonathan and I will collect any miscellaneous kryptonite from the guards and the weapon. Clark asked, don't you want to wait for me? Jack said, I was in the Marines. I can handle a couple of guards who need a rock to protect themselves.